Hello, everyone, and welcome into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Sorry for that little blip there. I completely forgot to plug into my mic, which is an important part of the show, or else you wouldn't have heard me throughout its duration. But other than that, welcome in to the show. I am always your host, Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in to our Thursday edition of the show. And on this Thursday edition, we're going to be getting into more sports outside of the realm of football. Obviously, a big college football playoff semifinal game tonight between Notre Dame and Penn State, two premier college football institutions. But we're also going to be mixing in a little bit of MLB. We're going to be talking about MLB free agency, some big winners in that regard. We're going to be looking at one of the best talents left in the hot stove MLB sweepstakes in Roki Sasaki, the generational Japanese ace that a lot of teams are clamoring over. And then I'm going to be giving you some hypothetical reasons as to why two of the AFC's elite teams, in both the Kansas City Chiefs looking for their third straight Super Bowl and the Buffalo Bills looking for their franchise first ever Super Bowl after their many losses in the 90s, can win the Super Bowl this particular season. It should be an exciting, exhilarating episode to kind of end your Thursday afternoon. But before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you, as always, if you want more content such as this, consider liking, following, and subscribing to both the show and the network. Great way, as always, to get up to date in terms of all the content we post on here. But if you want to contribute and interact with our shows a little bit more directly, you can do one of two things. You can either go to our website, GSMCpodcast.net, as you will see on the ticker on my screen. Leave a tip or donation there, or a question, comment, or concern as well. Or you can do it through our Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube while you're watching. Great way to contribute and interact as always. I love hearing your opinions. Let me know what you guys want to see on this show from now on. It's not just all about football now. This is the Dead Ball Sports Podcast. We'll be talking every single sport on this show, and I want your input during all of it. But without further ado, let's jump right into our first segment, starting off the day talking some MLB. Let's talk some baseball, particularly some hot stove rumors and the big winners thus far amongst these teams. Now, a lot of the time, some people might say that smaller market teams can find more value in certain players over big market teams. That has not been the case this year. The rich have only gotten richer, and all three of these teams were in the postseason last year and made it very far. One team was an NLCS finalist. The others were two World Series finalists, as you all know who those were. But ultimately, it just goes to show that sometimes when you're dominant, you can do many more things than a small market team cannot. And so that is one aspect of these winners that I found online. They all are looking to be dominant for the next half decade or so, and they've only gotten better at this juncture in their free agency cycle over these past couple of months through these important re-signings and additions as well. So without further ado, let's jump right into the winners of the free agency cycle thus far in MLB. Starting off with our World Series champion, a team that will continue to steamroll through the MLB for many years to come. They're just so well built, a lot of depth, a lot of talent at each and every position, and they only, like I said, got richer in that regard. Most importantly for this team, before we get into all of their additions that really bolstered the depth of their overall squad, let's talk about some re-signings here, because it's always important as a World Series champion to retain most of the core that helped you at that point in the first place, and no less so for the Dodgers. This has been a long time coming for them. This is their first quote-unquote real championship that they've won after also many years winning those NL West titles, winning large amounts of games. This is the first time they really won a real championship, and they wanted to retain and maintain that status quo with the locker room and through believing in the players that got them there in the first place. So, some of the most important re-signings they made were Teoscar Hernandez, Blake Trinan, and Tommy Edman. All important cogs in the Dodgers machine in the postseason. Hernandez, incredible defensive abilities in the infield, incredible both in terms of hitting for power and average. Then you look at Blake Trinan, perhaps their best closer on this team. Someone who in high leverage situations was able to come in for them and ultimately close out games. And Tommy Edman, remarkable run to the postseason, a true foundational piece of that Dodgers World Series winning squad. NLCS MVP, really helped them both defensively when they needed that spark offensively. He rose to the occasion as well, and ultimately that core three remains with the team and ultimately just makes it that much more deep. That's not all. The additions that they made as well also go to show their talent in terms of acquiring depth. They added Conforto, an interesting piece in the outfield, can move a lot of players around in that regard. They have a very deep outfield core. A lot of players can go from the infield to the outfield here. You can have guys like Mookie Betts, Teoscar Hernandez playing both in and outfield. Now Conforto cements himself as a potential permanent right fielder for this team, so you don't necessarily have that much movement amongst your infield, and certain players can remain at their preferred positions. And then Hye-Seung Kim is an interesting addition, the Japanese talent who can play both shortstop and second base. More of a depth addition, not necessarily a high-profile signing for this Dodgers side, but most importantly, gives them that much more depth if they need it in the infield, especially at the shortstop position, should you know Mookie Betts wants some more days off. And then most importantly, at the top of their rotation, they added Blake Snell. So now you're looking at a Dodgers rotation that includes two prior Cy Young winners, when healthy, in Blake Snell and Clayton Kershaw, two guys who could get to that point in both Yoshinobu Yamamoto and a now healthy Shohei Ohtani, who will be able to pitch this year after not being able to last year due to Tommy John. You have two young guys in Tony Gonsolin and Dustin May who are also capable of that, really kind of have been forgotten after their runs in 2020 when they first entered the league, but still talented receivers. I mean pitchers in their own regard as well. But ultimately, the depth of this team is just incredible, so they had to be on this list here because of the ways they added to it and because of the way they retained it as well after their World Series run. Let's talk about the runners-up in that World Series, the Yankees. Obviously, they lost Juan Soto, and that's a big hit in terms of the hitting prowess they had in that offense, and it certainly will leave a little bit of a hole in the middle of that batting lineup, but they did great ways to compensate for that. They signed Cody Bellinger, right? He's an interesting piece. Not necessarily the big power hitter he once was in Chicago, but certainly adds a lot of defensive capability, something they struggled with all of last season, especially in the postseason in critical moments. So Cody Bellinger is a nice defensive piece. And then a one-year deal for Paul Goldschmidt, shifting things around in the infield a little bit, maybe adding a little bit more depth defensively for that Yankees infield. But then I think the most important aspects of their offseason have come through the pitching additions. Because last year, there were some questionable decisions amongst their bullpen and inconsistencies, and Yankees fans seemingly have been clamoring for a left-handed pitcher to counteract all the righties in their rotation. So they did sign Max Fried. That's one thing to check off the list. And then they traded for closer Devin Williams, another who's quite clearly seen as one of the best closing relievers, even though New York fans all know what happened when Devin Williams last went up against a New York team. So that's something that could come around for them. But ultimately, interesting offseason for the Yankees, trying to compensate for the loss of such a power hitter in Juan Soto. And I think they did pretty admirably, considering, because I think about this Yankees team having more problems defensively than offensively in the first place. And Bellinger and Goldschmidt, yes, they might not offer twice as much production as Juan Soto did as two players than Juan Soto did as one, but defensively speaking, they are pretty stout. And then the signing of Max Fried's obvious. All Yankees fans probably wanted a left-handed reliever to counteract all those righties in their rotation. And then Devin Williams, of course, to help mitigate those interesting bullpen decisions Aaron Boone was left with in critical moments in the postseason. So, notwithstanding the loss of Juan Soto, I do think that the Yankees are some winners of the MLB free agency cycle thus far. But then let's get into their crosstown rivals in Queens, the New York Mets. Obviously, if you sign Juan Soto and you tie him down for that number of years, I don't care about what tension he creates in the locker room. I don't care about any rumors Yankees fans have about them. That's a pretty good offseason to me. I feel like, considering the fact that there's so much top-end talent at the top of the lineup for the Mets batting-wise. You have Lindor now. You have Mark Vientos, who really came alive last season. You now have Soto. You have all of these power hitters at the top of the lineup. It's a robust supporting cast that will allow Juan Soto to shine in Citi Field. Then you re-sign Manaea in terms of pitching. And that's an interesting re-sign because Sean Manaea certainly proved that he was one of, if not the best pitchers in your staff. And I do feel like in certain moments in the postseason, he truly lived up to that notion. And I feel like, yes, in the Dodgers, he kind of came crumbling back to earth a little bit, but still, I feel like Sean Manaea is someone who can carry the load for the New York Mets pitching rotation. And then you sign Frankie Montas as well, keeping up that good rapport with the A's for some reason and their pitching staff. So you have a pretty solid pitching staff. It's not going to carry you at any certain point of the season, but it's still one of the better ones in all of the MLB. But I do think that another big question that the Mets want to kind of finalize and bring to a close is the whole Pete Alonso thing. When and where he will sign. If he does leave, how that truly alters this team batting-wise. And ultimately, if he stays, how potent this offensive lineup is going to look on the field. And so that's another question that we can leave for another day. But let me know what you think about all of these free agency winners in the comments below. We're going to continue talking about what Roki Sasaki can mean for several of these teams later on this show. But coming up next, we're going to be previewing tonight's first CFP semifinal match between two premier college football institutions in Notre Dame and Penn State. So it should be a good one, and you don't want to miss it.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, talking some CFP semifinal matchups, we have to remind you as always, if you want more content such as this, to like, follow, and subscribe to both the show and the network. Great ways to keep up to date with all the content we release on the channel. But if you want to contribute and interact with our shows a little bit more directly, make yourselves available as always to both our website, gsmcpodcast.net, to leave a tip or donation or questions, comments, or concerns there, or the super chat, super thanks, and super stickers features here while we are live streaming our shows on YouTube. Great way as always to get your input out there, your opinions on what I want you to do with the show. I'm always looking for nice ideas, so let me know what you think as always in the comments. Just makes it that much better. Without further ado, let us jump into the CFP semifinal match between Notre Dame and Penn State, taking place at 7:30 tonight. Now, let me set the scene for this game, because we're talking about two premier college football institutions. Not a lot of people realize how powerful both Notre Dame and Penn State were in the past as fantastic college football programs. When we think Notre Dame, we think history, a program steeped in it, Legendary players, legendary coaches, Newt Rockne, Ara Parsagian might come to mind. But the last time this team won a national championship was in 1988. On the Penn State side of things, they've had a lot of history, for good and worse. But ultimately, whether you love or hate him, the legendary Joe Paterno only came away with 2 championships during his tenure, and the last one came in 1986. So this is a long time coming for both of these teams. Now let's look at the modern head coaches here, because I think this is an interesting storyline to diagnose and analyze outside of what could happen in this game as well. When you look at Marcus Freeman, what he's done within the first 2 to 3 years of his tenure, create this aggressive smash mouth style of football that a lot of his players are buying into. Notre Dame's becoming a destination spot for all these young recruits as well. They want to play for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish in the green and gold. And Marcus Freeman really has been an elite level coach these past couple of seasons. The problem is he's lost some really baffling games. Marshall, this year's NIU game, comes to mind. And because of that, Notre Dame has had to play every single game of his tenure like in the playoffs. That really has helped them grow and mature as a team, but they don't necessarily want to be doing that all the time just because they've lost to teams they should have beaten handily. On the other side of things, James Franklin's been around the block plenty of times, but he doesn't necessarily have the high-profile wins to show for it. In fact, looking before the show, trying to get all the stats right about his records against these AP top 25 and top 5 teams for that matter, he sits at 3-17 against AP top 25 teams. That number falls to 1-12 against AP top 5 teams. So as you can see, interesting coaching battle. Never have they been on this platform before with a chance to compete for the national championship. Both of these programs will be getting to the game after such a long absence from it. Now, let's talk a little bit about these teams and about how this game can play out. And if you're a big fan of stout defenses and solid running games, then this game is probably for you, because these teams are starkly similar in their identities and how they move the football and how their defenses play as a result. Looking at Notre Dame, I feel like Notre Dame has gone underrated this season in terms of their offensive identity. I think it's been a little bit off-putting in terms of how people view their success, but in the playoffs, it has worked to a T. Hand the ball off to your 2 running backs, Love and Price, and ultimately good things will happen. You'll control the football and, most importantly, keep the football out of opposing offenses' hands. On the Penn State side of things, I think they do have the better quarterback in this game. Drew Aller has looked pretty solid in each of these past playoff games, but not necessarily spectacular. He is someone who's good for an explosive play or two every game, and he has the do-it-all receiver, tight end, running back hybrid in Tyler Warren to help him. But I do think that when Penn State are at their best, it's through their running back tandem themselves, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. And then, looking at these two defenses, they're stacked. Notre Dame, yes, really banged up on that side of the football. They don't have star linebacker Riley Mills. Benjamin Morrison, their star cornerback, has been battling injury all year. Only safety Xavier Watts has really been with a full bill of health in this defense all year in terms of stars, but they still have a lot of talent both up front and in the secondary to compensate for all those injuries. On the Penn State side of things, it all begins up front. Danny Dennis-Sutton and Abdul Carter are the kings of tackles for loss, kings of creating pressures, and the secondary has really come to life as well. 2 pick sixes against SMU in their first playoff game, and really did a great job of keying in on Ashton Jeanty as well against Boise State. So as you can see, these two teams have very similar mindsets of how they want to approach this game. Thus, that could be resulting in a very low-scoring affair. But ultimately, I do feel that the reason why I'm leaning a little bit toward Notre Dame, I live in the tri-state area. My friend went to Penn State. I have a lot of friends who have been around that Penn State culture and know what it's about. The reason why I have to lean Notre Dame in this game, even though I feel like Penn State are better in a lot of different aspects here. The quarterback, the run game, if Jeremiah Love isn't close to 100% in this one. Defensively, I believe they're just a bit better in terms of generating pressure, and that could matter a lot. I think in this one, it's going to come down to ball control. And I feel like while Drew Aller is certainly a game-altering quarterback in this situation, he's prone to make explosive plays. I don't necessarily think that Notre Dame's defense will fall for it. And Riley Leonard, on the other hand, while not as impressive in certain moments as Drew Aller has been in this playoff, has been critical in his decision-making in key moments down the stretch. Against Georgia, we saw it. Every single one of his 91 rushing yards against Georgia were important to the outcome of that game. If he did not have those rushing yards, Notre Dame could potentially have lost that game. But combine that with their stout defensive play, and combine that with Riley Leonard's intelligence as a running quarterback, as a dual-threat quarterback, and you have a team that's really difficult to beat when they win the time of possession battle. And the time of possession battle will matter in this game. And I think if Notre Dame and Jeremiah Love is anything close to 100%, and Riley Leonard makes the same decisions he made against Georgia, and they really slow down this pass rush of Penn State, they might have better answers than what Penn State has to throw at them. Because Penn State, I really love this football team when it's firing on all cylinders. I really love when Drew Aller's in rhythm, when he's confident, when he's making throws like he did against Boise State. But the ultimate thing that gives me pause is that will they, if Notre Dame generate enough pressure on Aller, revert to this team that simply is too over-reliant on three key players, Singleton, Allen, and Warren? Because if they are, then that really, really stagnates them offensively. So I'm looking for the key players for Penn State's offense to be guys outside of those three. I'm looking for Omari Evans to step up. I'm looking for Harrison Wallace to step up. And while they are deep at receivers, they also have to be versatile in short to intermediate areas of the field as well. Because I do feel like Notre Dame's secondary can feel confident in winning some of those matchups. Maybe not all of them, but enough to key in on the run game and what Warren can do. So that's going to have to be something that Penn State has to overcome in this game, has to really key in on and really attack, because if they don't, then I don't see them really winning the game with the very few possessions I think each team will have. Because Notre Dame is built to play complementary football. If, they come out and they're on defense and they immediately shut down Drew Aller and co. It's a 3-and-out. That gives them motivation to say, we can take control of this game. We can set the tone defensively, and that could lead to offensively, where we can wear down this Penn State pass rush. You can't give Notre Dame an inch, is what I'm saying here. And if Penn State does, and Drew Aller's a little bit too careless at times, perhaps, with the football, then Notre Dame will be apt to pounce. And this is no indictment of Penn State. I think that Penn State can stay in this football game because, like I said, these two teams are too similar to really kind of parse through all the differences here. But I do feel like in terms of how this game looks on paper, ball control matters above all. And I do feel like Riley Leonard in this offense might just be a little bit better at that. Yes, I understand. On both sides of the football, Notre Dame are the more banged up team, and injuries matter. Absences matter, most importantly. And without Riley Mills, without, Jeremiah Love potentially on offense, you're losing two of your best and most impactful players on both sides of the football. But I do feel like they have been a team that has overcome a lot. They wouldn't have been here if they didn't overcome that Week 2 loss to NIU in the first place. So this team has been playing every single game with a level of control and maturity ever since that loss that's very tough to beat. And I just feel like they're a steamrolling machine headed to the national championship game. I do think there are ways that Penn State can win this game. Don't get me wrong. They're going to have to win the turnover battle, which is tough because Notre Dame has won almost every turnover battle in the playoff thus far. The reason why they beat Georgia, they have to hit on all of their explosives. They can't just hit on one or two. They have to, if they're taking that risk downfield, to hit on all of those explosives, or else their offense might just stagnate and Notre Dame's defense will really begin to overwhelm them. And most importantly, you have to make sure Riley Leonard does not escape the pocket, because when Riley Leonard escapes the pocket, creates out of structure on those design runs or scrambles, that's when he's his most dangerous. So if they do all three of those things, there's a chance for a win here for Penn State. But I just think that because of the style of play that Notre Dame implements week in, week out, ever since that harrowing loss to NIU, this team is just a tough team to beat in any setting. And Marcus Freeman really will have his guys ready for tonight, for this moment, to lead them back to the promised land for the first time since 1988. I'm going to take them in a very close one, 24-21. I think it's going to come down to a last-minute field goal, which is interesting because Notre Dame had a lot of kicking problems coming in to the playoff, but Mitch Jeter seemingly solved them last game against Boise State when he made all of his attempts. So I do think it will come down to kicking, because that's how highly I think of these two teams' similarities. But it should be a fun one. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below. But coming up next, we go back to the realm of MLB, talking about a generational Japanese talent that could swing momentum in a certain contender's favor should he land with them. So we're going to be talking about all the contenders for his signature this offseason and who could really be contenders to sign him as well. We'll be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for our third segment of the day, we're going to be talking about an interesting generational talent coming from Japan on over to the MLB that could really swing the momentum of the entire free agency cycle firmly in the direction of one of the contenders we talked about, or a team usually not in these kind of free agency sweepstakes that could build momentum with his signing. I'm talking about Roki Sasaki, the Japanese pitcher who is really looking to be a premier signing for any team that's looking to sign him on the dotted line. We're looking for him to sign on the dotted line, rather. I messed up the whole thing there, but let's look into Roki Sasaki first and foremost and what makes him so appealing to a lot of MLB teams. First of all, let's talk about his tenure in Japan. With the Chiba Lotte Marines, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, he had a 2.10 ERA, just 88 walks and 394 and 2/3 innings, 505 strikeouts in that same amount of time. So as you can see, he really has gained a lot of respect, not just internationally, but in the MLB as well, and it's really caught the eye of a lot of teams. And then, when we hear all these scouting reports coming from these MLB teams, they really like his ability in terms of his velocity, the shape he puts on the ball, the spin he gets, his fastball that's in the regions of 100 miles per hour, and a lot of teams really appreciate his ability to pitch inside. I was reading a report before the show from a Dodgers scout who's looking into signing Sasaki, and they're one of the teams firmly in the race for his signature. I was talking about his ability to work inside. But there is one problem that a lot of teams are going to have to really compensate for in signing his signature. But it's that he is going to be someone who wants to go deep into games. He wants to be a 7th inning, 8th inning kind of pitcher. And it's really not going to work in today's MLB landscape when pitchers are getting the axe within, say, 4 to 5 innings. So Roki Sasaki truly does want to be, quote-unquote, the face of the franchise. And of all the 20 teams that he's talked to, I feel like only 7 will allow him to be. But even those 7, amongst those 7, there are still some pratfalls that need to be overcome should they really go in on trying to sign him. And so let's talk about how Roki Sasaki profiles in the MLB first and foremost, and then look at all of the teams in terms of the sweepstakes for his signature. So, Roki Sasaki is an interesting case here, right? With all these Japanese international players, what have you, coming abroad, Roki Sasaki is perhaps the most interesting case, because unlike a lot of these Japanese players, he is someone who circumvents certain standards, because I don't necessarily know how to describe it because I just read it. He is someone who would fulfill the international player pool for a certain team should they sign him. But since he did not play 6 or more years in that professional league, he will be a little bit cheaper, and because of his youth, he's 25 years old, he would also be more appealing to small market teams, because he's not like someone who command a lot of money like Yamamoto or Shohei Ohtani. Some say that his contract could reach into those regions, more Yamamoto than Shohei's most recent contract, so to speak. But because of that, it is a very intriguing case study of who could be in on his signature. So let's talk about the 7 or so teams, whether they be teams that are really looking to contend, former World Series champions, so to speak, or those small market teams who could be more appealing in terms of contract size. So, of all the 8 or 7 teams that a lot of these scouts, a lot of these reports are coming out with saying, of these 7 or 8 teams, I feel like 3 are really appealing in terms of these small market teams wanting to sign him. But let's talk about the 7 teams first and foremost. So, the 7 teams that he feels most strongly about at this current moment in time. The LA Dodgers, we just talked about. The San Diego Padres, a team we're going to be talking about a lot when it comes to Sasaki. The Texas Rangers could be an interesting team. Then the Yankees, Mets, we also talked about, and the Cubs and the Giants. So those are the 7 teams who are expected to be firmly in the discussions for Roki Sasaki's signature. So let's talk about each of them. Let's start off with the big guns first. Let's talk about the Yankees, Dodgers, and Mets. Well, we already saw the Yankees sign a lefty. Roki Sasaki's a righty, so I don't necessarily think that will fit in the balance of the rotation. So I do think that even though it will be a nice little addition to an already impressive offseason for the New York Yankees, I don't necessarily think it would be anything special. It would just be adding surplus to what they already have. Then let's talk about the Dodgers as well. Really didn't do much after signing Blake Snell on the pitching front, but look at the depth and talent of this LA Dodgers pitching rotation. You have 3 of the best Japanese aces if they do end up signing Sasaki, and you already have Blake Snell. You could potentially have another full season of Clayton Kershaw should he come back healthy. You have 2 young guys still in Tony Gonsolin and Dustin May. We've already talked about this. They would be overwhelmingly loaded at the starting pitching spot. And then Tap to Learn comes into the comments, when are we expecting this to be done? I'm not completely certain. I feel like it's going to get done a little bit closer to the end of the deadline for free agency. I don't necessarily see this being done within the next couple of weeks or within the month, so to speak. I do think this will be dragged out a little bit. I think he's exploring and weighing all his options. And like I said, because of the whole contract situation and what that means for smaller market teams, that means they'll be in this race for as long as possible. This could be about a waiting game for a lot of these teams. So I can't really tell you a specific deadline for his signature for all of these teams, but I do think we'll come a little bit closer towards the end of free agency. But let's get back into these teams. So we've already nixed the Yankees and the Dodgers. Now we're getting into teams who I think can work. The Mets, I can see this working a little bit more than the Dodgers and the Yankees, but again, I feel like you've invested a lot in guys like Manaea, signing Montes, and really developing guys like Peterson. We haven't really seen Blackburn play for them at all, but I can see this being a justifiable signing for this rotation. I think it will be a statement of intent from Steve Cohen in terms of not just investing in building the best batting lineup, but also a stellar pitching rotation. So I can see this work, but not necessarily as much as certain teams. Now let's talk about the Texas Rangers, because this is an interesting case study here. They already did this with Yu Darvish many years ago, and as a Texas Rangers fan, I remember that fondly until, he had all those injury issues and then he left without a championship to his name. But in this situation, I do feel like it could work, but I do think when this Texas Rangers pitching staff is healthy, it is one of the best in the league. You have Jacob deGrom, you have Nittany Lions back, you have Tyler Mahle. Yes, he's aging a little bit. You have John Gray, a lot of innings eaters. And Roki Sasaki could help compensate for all the injuries and also the youth at the back end, well, with guys like Leiter and Rocker coming in for this staff. But ultimately, I don't necessarily think that when fully healthy and firing on all cylinders, the Texas Rangers pitching staff will need someone of Sasaki's ilk. Now let's get into the top 3 candidates in my mind. The Cubs, the Giants, and the Padres. And it's interesting that I think all these small market teams have more of a chance than, say, a Dodgers or a Yankees, but I do think they would be more appealing to Sasaki, because even though teams such as them might not want him going more than 7 innings, A, they're small market teams, so he'll take all the innings they can get, and B, he would immediately be perhaps the number 1 ace on this roster as soon as he walks their doors. So let's talk about the Cubs a little bit, because I think they ultimately are the most appealing destination. They already have a Japanese ace on their roster in Shota Imanaga. I believe they still have Justin Steele, who's appealing. Javier Assad had a decent season last year, but ultimately they don't really have a generational talent. They have a lot of innings eaters. They have solid guys, but not elite guys at the pitching position. So Roki Sasaki can immediately come in and cement himself as the ace in Chicago. Then, same thing with the Giants. They're not necessarily known for their pitching prowess. They have a guy in Logan Webb who probably would still be the number 1 guy, even if Roki Sasaki signs. As Anthony Manzano says, I'm predicting this. Roki goes to the Dodgers, and then the Dodgers trade for Sandy from Miami. Okay, that's a little bit too indulgent there from the Dodgers. If they pick up both Sandy Alcantara and Roki Sasaki, their pitching staff would be insane. But who knows? The Dodgers are the Dodgers, and they've already had one of the better off seasons in this free agency cycle. So why not? But I still think that small market teams could be appealing here, and they're very much still in this thing. But I appreciate the comment, because it would be ridiculous to think about a pitching rotation that had 3 of the best Japanese pitchers: Clayton Kershaw, Blake Snell, Sandy Alcantara, Tony Gonsolin, and Dustin May. It would be completely ridiculous and ludicrous to think about it, and thank you for putting that thought in my mind, but I just cannot see it in my mind. It would just be too overpowering on every single front. Let's talk about why a team like the Giants could be a little bit more appealing, even though they are one of the Dodgers' closest rivals. I do think they need at least one more high-profile pitcher. They have Webb, they have Robbie Ray, but I do need someone who's a little bit more high-profile and can be more of an innings eater, and thus that's why Roki could appeal to a Giants team that really doesn't do as many high-profile signings. And then San Diego, they haven't really had a high-profile pitching signing. They've had their share of fascinating signings over the years and high-profile ones to get to where they are in terms of contention status. But I do think that this San Diego Padres team is appealing because they do have an aging pitching staff. They do have a pitching staff that is on its final legs in terms of contract expiries. Dylan Cease's contract is expiring. I'm now blanking on names, but a lot of players in this lineup is signing. Michael King's final year is coming up in terms of his contract expiry. But I do think the San Diego Padres would be stating their intent to build as well rotational depth, as well as a batting lineup that is one of the most potent in all of MLB. So if Roki signs there, I do think that would be a great decision because it would be a younger look for them. It would be one where you can tie him down for X amount of years and not have to worry. As Anthony Manzano has honestly been saying this, my dark horse for Roki, I think he shocks everybody and goes to Seattle to revitalize that franchise. I can see it, even though I really like what Seattle is building through their pitching staff. They don't really have one high-profile name they can lean on. So I do like this, and I do, even as a Texas Rangers fan, appreciate that comment because it's a team that could very well sneak up on everyone and say, hey, we're building a nice, young, rotation staff and we want to make a high-profile signing, so why not? But I do feel that out of all the teams on this current list, San Diego is a destination for him. Let me continue to know what you think in the comments. But coming up next, we're going to be talking about two of the AFC's elite and some hypothetical reasons as to why both of them can win the Super Bowl this season, starting off with a team going for a historic three-peat, the Kansas City Chiefs. You definitely don't want to miss it after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And before we get into our fourth thing of the day, I do want to address a comment we got during the break from Anthony yet again. Hypothetical, if the Dodgers do get Roki and Sandy in their current pitching staff, who would likely move to the bullpen? I'm not necessarily certain because neither of these guys profile like they would want to be a bullpen pitcher or reliever, so to speak. But I do think Sandy could make the adjustment a little bit more so than Roki. I think Roki wants to be an inning eater type of guy. And Sandy, he does have an interesting approach to pitching. He tends to go deeper in games than most current pitchers do. But I do think that he can adjust most specifically to a bullpen need for the Dodgers, should they want to even make that trade. But it's just ridiculous to think about at this time, considering already the amount of depth the Los Angeles Dodgers have in terms of pitching. But let's get into our fourth segment of today's show, talking about some hypothetical reasons as to why the Kansas City Chiefs, a team looking for a historic three-peat, can win the Super Bowl. It's not just the black magic permeating in their locker room, permeating through the coaching staff. It's a real concrete possibility due to the players. And I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily want to buy into this. They're really looking at other promising teams in the AFC, potentially the Bills and the Ravens, potentially in the NFC, the Lions perhaps, or the Eagles. But I still think that Kansas City has as best a chance of anyone to win this year's Super Bowl, just because of the health that they've been getting, the health updates they've been getting, and also the fact that in the playoffs, they just coach better than any team. Both Andy Reid and Steve Spagnuolo just coach, outclass you, overwhelm you in every single regard. That's going to be difficult to see a loss. So without further ado, here's why I believe the Chiefs win the Super Bowl. And then Anthony is always saying, no, let me clarify what I'm saying. The Dodgers bring these two guys in on their current starting rotation who would likely move to the bullpen, not the guys they brought in. So I believe what you're trying to say is who out of the current staff now would move to the bullpen should they bring in both Roki and Sandy. Now I see your point. So Gonsolin and May, I do like both of them, but seeing as to how they were kind of a little bit flash in the panty for quite some time to start their careers, I think that one of them could potentially move. I don't see some high-profile guys moving down there like Yamamoto, or maybe if they're not necessarily comfortable with Shohei pitching so many amount of innings, they might move him there. But I think that Gonsolin and May might be the two guys who ultimately would have to surrender their roles in the rotation to make space for the two guys you're suggesting here. But I do think it's an interesting case study because of, like I said, the depth they already have and the decisions they would have to make to compensate for any decisions they make in terms of Roki and Sandy's status in their rotations. So I do appreciate that point, and I do think that Gonsolin and May might suffer. But getting into looking at the reasons to why I think the Chiefs can win the Super Bowl. Yes, these past 2 years have not been great offensively for them. We can get that straight out of the gate. And yes, their offensive line has to shore up. It was a big problem last year, probably an even bigger problem this year, especially with rookie left-right tackle Kingsley Suamataya, or with all the issues they've had with him and Wanye Morris as well, and how they shift around this offensive line. They do have issues to overcome as well as anyone else in this playoff bracket. But I do think that one thing that's been a positive silver lining these past couple of weeks for the Kansas City Chiefs is all the positive news in the health department. They get Hollywood Brown back and immediately been going to him more than almost any receiver in this lineup. It opens up a lot for both Xavier Worthy and DeAndre Hopkins in return. Then you look at Isaiah Pacheco, and even though he's not necessarily the biggest running back in terms of helping you in terms of a solid rushing game, I do think that he's solid enough to really help open up that avenue for the Chiefs if, say, things do go awry in the passing game. I do think Isaiah Pacheco is just consistent enough, especially in the postseason, to where the Chiefs can start to lean on their running game a little bit more than usual. And then I do feel like there's something to be said about the magical aura that presents itself when we talk about their record in one-score games. They're 7-1 in one-score games. They find ways to win. I don't necessarily care what you say about the refs influencing those decisions, but I do feel like that speaks for itself. They're better than anyone in the critical moments, and I feel like when we examine all the games this season, the first game of the season, whether we're toenail away from potentially losing that game, the blocked field goal, they just win every single play that matters. And combined with all the positive updates in the health department, all these guys returning to the lineup, this makes them that much more potent. And yes, they're a 15-2 team that has not scored 30 points all season. But it might not even matter because they have two of the best head coaches that can coach in any singular situation, whether it be in a high-scoring shootout or in a low-scoring affair, which we'll most likely see from them come postseason. Both Andy Reid and Steve Spagnuolo know what they want to do. Steve Spagnuolo is one of the most difficult defensive coordinators to prepare for when it comes to the postseason. He will blitz you, he'll disguise coverages, he'll generate pressure by hook or by crook, and Andy Reid trusts that his offense will pick up the slack eventually. We saw it in the last Super Bowl win. We saw it where every single play in the last couple of minutes of the fourth quarter into overtime was won by the Chiefs. We saw it when they had to stop Brock Purdy on that third down. We saw it when they were bold enough to go for it on 2 fourth downs in their game-winning drive. We see it every single year come postseason time. They are willing to go above and beyond what any other coach is thinking. And, you know, looking at other teams in this bracket, it's safe to say that certainly there are going to be many different pathways as to how the Chiefs will have to beat teams. For example, if they do come up against a Ravens team, how are they going to stop the multiplicity of that offensive attack? How are they going to stop the run game and Derrick Henry getting hot and opening up a lot of avenues for Lamar Jackson in the passing game in turn? If they face the Bills, how are they going to deal with the fact that they really don't have a number one receiver? They really just allow Josh Allen to settle into games and ultimately just outscore you. Similarly, the Lions, should they get to the Super Bowl and the Lions be their opponent, how are they going to stop this very versatile, multifaceted Lions offense? Those questions seemingly might not be able to be answered right now, but I do know that no matter what, I'm taking Andy Reid and Steve Spagnuolo in any situation, whether it be a shootout or a low-scoring affair. So that's why I think the Chiefs are more dangerous than any other team in this postseason bracket. Now let's talk about the players that most likely will be the X factors in this one. I feel that Hollywood Brown's arrival really is going to make it challenging for all the cornerbacks on the AFC side of the bracket to really key in on one specific receiver here. Because as soon as Hollywood Brown got going in the last couple of games he played, now before the postseason, when they targeted him on 8 of 14 routes that he ran, It opened up different avenues for Xavier Worley to get going. And DeAndre Hopkins is still dangerous in certain areas of the field as well. And he's going to push those guys who are more role-playing pieces in Watson and Gray further down the depth chart and allow the Chiefs to really get into the packages they want, where you have the danger men in Brown, Hopkins, and Worthy out on the field more. And yes, Travis Kelce's declining, but if these receivers can pick up the slack, much unlike what they were doing last year when Travis Kelce had to pick up the slack, then who cares if Travis Kelce looks a little bit more inept in this postseason than he has in recent ones, because of all the offensive weapons they have now. And then, in terms of Isaiah Pacheco, he's a really big factor into their success in the postseason, because if they do develop enough of a running game to where you have to pay attention to it if you're an opposing defense, that opens a lot of more avenues for Patrick Mahomes in this downfield passing game. And now you have a deep ball threat guy in Hollywood Brown who can take the top of a defense at any time. So all the pieces are starting to come together yet again for the Kansas City Chiefs. And yes, the offensive line woes are going to have to be compensated for somehow. You're going to have to find a configuration of guys up front that really feel like they can get it done, can coalesce together, can hold up in pass pro. Most importantly, make sure Mahomes doesn't get pressured as often as he has this season. And then you also have to look at, how all these pieces might be able to fit. Who will have to give up certain target shares, so to speak, in this offense as well. But ultimately, if there's any team I believe can overcome any adversity this postseason, it is the Kansas City Chiefs, because we've already seen it before, and who's to say they can't go for a historic three-peat and ultimately pull it off. And that's why I think the Kansas City Chiefs have at best a chance as anyone of winning their first Super Bowl. But let me know what you think in the comments, their third straight Super Bowl in franchise history. But let me know what you think in the comments, because coming up next we're going to be talking about a team still looking for their first Super Bowl. That's where I mixed up. The Buffalo Bills. How can they win their first Super Bowl this season on the AFC side of the bracket? We're coming up to conclude today's show right after this short break. Welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for our final segment of today's show, we're going to be looking at a team still looking for their franchise first Super Bowl after so many failures in the 90s to overcome that hurdle. The Buffalo Bills. Whereas we talked with the Chiefs going for a historic three-peat, this is still a team looking for their first. But this is as good a year as any for them to potentially break through in a very loaded AFC. So without further ado, let's get into why I think that and why I believe the Bills have a fantastic chance of capturing the Lombardi Trophy for the first time ever. Let's start off with how impressive this offense have looked, because I truly believe that this has been the best iteration of this Bills offense, despite the fact that a lot of people think it would have been their worst. A lot of people, like I said, coming in before the season were saying because of the loss of Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis to free agency, this offense could potentially see its first sign of struggle. But no, it has been better than ever, and for the most part has been perhaps the best Josh Allen era Bills offense we have seen. And that's kudos to Joe Brady for really developing Josh Allen into someone who's not just this big arm, big talent threat, and becoming someone who, much like Mahomes can be, play it safe and take what the defense gives him. And as a result, something that a lot of people were a little bit skeptical about in Josh Allen's game has been compensated for. His ability to protect the football. And a lot of things that were talked about in the offseason were because of the fact that he no longer has guys in Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis-Leon, his turnover rate would skyrocket into the stratosphere, unlike any we've seen, unlike any in his career before. But this has been a season where he's protected the football more than ever, and his offensive line has protected him more than ever as well. But he kind of protects himself in terms of how he views the game scrambling-wise as well. Let's talk about one important stat that I think is really impressive in terms of talking about this offense. This is the only team, and this is a fact I saw just before the show, this is the only team in the Super Bowl era to head into the postseason giving up fewer than 15 sacks a season, and then also with fewer than 15 giveaways in a season. So as you can see, this offense has been fantastic at overcoming the mistakes that Josh Allen has made in the past and reducing them as a result. So I have to pinpoint Joe Brady. But tab to learn, it's kind of challenging the notion in the comments talking about James Cook though. As James Cook capable of shouldering the load as a bell. I'm also saying Cooper has not really gelled either. Well, here's the thing. I do think that in terms of James Cook has actually been one of the better running backs in the league. I believe he's third in terms of scrimmage yards and touchdowns from scrimmage as well. So he's more than capable of shouldering the load. And I do like what he brings in the pass game as well from that standpoint. And yes, Amari Cooper has not gelled, but I do think that this offense is not about one individual receiver anymore. It's not about a star receiver like a Stephon Diggs, like an Amari Cooper. It's about more than the sum of its parts. I think Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, and co. can really come into this postseason and show the multiplicity of this offense. I'm worried for opposing defenses trying to game plan for an offense as versatile as this without a true number one receiver. And that's what makes them so special. And another kind of addition in terms of stats-wise as to why I think this offense really is special. They've had 12 games or 30 or more points. And like I said, lowest turnover rate, only 8 this season. And I feel like the best parts of this offense really compensate for one of the caveats in this Bills Super Bowl run. Their defense, because their defense has really not looked all that impressive, especially down the stretch this season. And I do think one aspect of their defense really has been troublesome all year long. Their third down defense. I believe they're the second or third worst defense when it comes to third down stops. And I feel like that's something that a lot of teams will want to key in on, especially looking at the first game the Bills will play this postseason against the Broncos and how they match up. A lot of people are saying this is a sneaky upset alert for the Buffalo Bills in this game. And I think there is merit in that argument in terms of how the Broncos could profile. Because even though in certain areas of their offense the Broncos can tend to come up shorter than a lot of playoff teams, I do feel like you can find certain matchups, whether it be on third and manageables or even third and longs, where they feel like they can attack the worst aspects of this Bills defense. I feel like, for the most part, a lot of things to do with their ineptitude on defense stems down to injuries as well. They haven't had Matt Milano or Terrell Bernard in their linebacking core for several games, but I do think that teams still feel like they can exploit that aspect of the Bills defense, especially to sustain drives, because that's what you're going to have to do to take down this Bills team, because chances are you're not going to be stopping them anytime soon. So I do feel like if teams can play into the Bills' identity and say, let's make this a shootout, and ultimately the Bills' defense might slip up a little bit more than ours, so why not just go for it? then I feel teams will be a little bit comfortable. And maybe that will slide against the Broncos because I don't think the Broncos are just there yet. But if they face the Ravens, and if they win that game, they face the Chiefs yet again, who knows what will happen. But let's talk a little bit more about the positives here, because I do think Josh Allen has to be appreciated this season, because his decision making has been the best it's been all year long, and it's down to the comfortability we've seen from him in this offense opposed to recent years. And I feel like when this team is at its best, Josh Allen is making decision makings in terms of his dual threat ability more quickly than any other quarterback in the league. And as a result, it's becoming more and more difficult to defend, say, if you're a heavy man coverage team like a lot of these AFC teams are. And then B, he's playing it a lot safer in terms of his passing game. I feel like he's more willing to dump it down to James Cook, pass to Khalil Shakir in the sticks, and then, when necessary, try and get a deep ball down to Keon Coleman, or even a guy in Dalton Kincaid who's very versatile at the tight end position, might I add. And then, I feel like, in terms of when I view opposing defenses this postseason, in terms of how they set up on the AFC side of the bracket, a lot of people's worry about how Josh Allen might attack these certain defenses lies in the fact that he's grown more confident in terms of throwing in the middle of the field. And a lot of these guys on the outside, in terms of opposing defenses I'm talking about, really are very strong. You have guys, for example, on the Broncos, Pat Surtain, Riley Moss. Then if you beat Denver and you face a team like Baltimore, you'll have to worry about Humphrey and Nate Wiggins. And then the Chiefs, you're going to have to worry about McDuffie. So there are a lot of tough corners who will force Josh Allen potentially outside of his comfort zone a little bit in terms of keeping in rhythm in the pass game. But I do feel like Josh Allen has grown a little bit more multifaceted in how he approaches the pass game. He's not just looking for that one deep shot that will kill you. He's looking to kill you by slowing down the tempo of this passing game and driving down the field, sustaining drives. And the most important part of that as well is not just his arm, it's his legs. And his legs can also come into play in terms of slowing down opposing teams' secondaries. So let's say, hypothetically, that a team like Baltimore or Kansas City does lock up his receivers, which could potentially be the case because, as we all know, the Bills have no true number one receiver, and it could be a little bit easier for these teams in the secondary. I feel like because Josh Allen can extend plays longer than any other quarterback in the league, potentially outside of Lamar, I do feel like that can be compensated for quite easily. And I feel like now he's not looking to run to throw, he's looking to run. And that intentionality creates a different conundrum for opposing defenses. Whereas when you got him outside the pocket before, you might have been able to force a throw out of him. And now he's looking to gain as many yards as possible, get out of bounds, and just get this drive going yet again. And so that's what makes this Bills offense a little bit more difficult to defend than in years past. Now, I feel like, obviously, the one caveat is a big one in terms of the defense, because a lot of these AFC teams, especially Baltimore, if you face them in the divisional round, are bound to put up points on you in a hurry. But I do feel like you can match them a little bit better if you're the Bills this year than any other year because of what I'm describing. And so, looking at their path, it is going to be a little bit more difficult and unique than in recent years because every single team feels like it can match your receivers a little bit better than in recent years because of how Joe Brady has improved Josh Allen to the point where he's not always looking for a true number one wide receiver to step up. that changes the game dramatically for every other opposing defense on the AFC side of the bracket. Now, if they do get to the Super Bowl and they face a team, say, like the Rams, who can generate a lot of pressure up front and have a very underrated secondary, or the Lions, who might have gotten a little bit healthier to that point. They obviously are hoping that Aiden Hutchinson can come back to that point and generate a lot of pressure, and also have a very underrated secondary in that regard, with a guy who's leading the league in interceptions in Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch, who's very versatile in the slot. I do feel like that's where they might see their most trouble all postseason. And I do think at the end of the day, you can't doubt the fact that Josh Allen has dramatically and drastically improved from where he was as a very turnover-prone guy just a year ago. And I think they have way more pieces and depth than a lot of people realize to help them get to that point. So that's why I believe Buffalo, despite all the odds before the season saying that this offense would struggle, despite the fact they don't really have a top receiver, despite the fact, they really don't have the best defense in the postseason, I still think this team is highly capable of making it all the way to the Super Bowl and finally hoisting the Lombardi Trophy. Let me know, continue to know what you think in the comments, because that will just about do it for today's edition of the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. I've been your host, Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you all for your comments. Continue to keep up the good work by clicking on the Super Chat, Super Things, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube, and contributing and interacting with the show a little bit more directly. Like, follow, and subscribe with the show in the network to keep more up to date with all of our shows. But other than that, I will see you tomorrow. I'm out for now.